On the last Sunday of every month, Project Save the World hosts a global town hall for activists all around the world who have things that they want to share and discuss with each other. This is the meeting for Sunday, May the 28th, 2023, and our guests have already assembled and we're about to have a good conversation. Well, hello, everybody. Nice to see you all. Hello, Robert Reed. And we have Lida.
Yes.
Hello, Lida. How are you? And we have Marilyn out in California.
Hi, everybody.
Marilyn is the cat lady. So tell us what's going on with the cats these days, the wildcats. You've got me interested in your feline friends.
Well, the last month, there hasn't been too much. I'm still actually focused on damage that was done to my house here in the mountains from the that storm. It's just an article that has to do with how even the simplest things that we do impact the environment, impact the wild animals. Anything from turning over a stone in the water. There are these they're kind of lizards that live underneath, and it destroys their homes, to even making trails right in the middle of the wildlife corridor. So I'm focusing on that right now a little bit.
I had open heart surgery recently, so now I am taking all sorts of different drugs that make me tired. So that's why I'm kind of so.
There are a couple of interesting newsworthy events that have happened in the last couple of weeks. And that is, of course, there was a meeting of the G7, I guess it was, in Hiroshima. And of course, they made some speeches, which they were no doubt trying to sound as if they were on the road to nuclear disarmament, but we know damn well they're not. And then, of course, there's the move that has recently begun in Belarus. Apparently, the Russians are moving, I presume, tactical nuclear weapons into Belarus, at least upping the ante in terms of their threat. Whether or not that means that they're any more likely to use them is another question. But the third thing that makes this a lucky moment that you raised the question is that Lyn Adamson has just joined us, and Lyn always has things to say about nuclear weapons. So hello, Lyn.
Well, it seems to me that it's getting very dangerous, more and more dangerous. From I read the John Polanyi's op-ed about our situation, and it's unbelievable how we've squandered of the progress that was made in the 80s and the 90s, like through that whole time period. It's really very scary, together with the Ukraine situation as well. And who is working on diplomacy? That would be really good to know, like what efforts are being made. Is our government doing anything? Is Bob Ray doing anything? Like, who's doing anything? I don't know.
One thing that's happened is that Ira Helfand, a doctor in Massachusetts who was on the International Physicians to Prevent Nuclear War, that got the Nobel Prize for Peace in 1984 for bringing Reagan and Gorbachev together. That gave him some influence in helping 2 or 3 senators enter a current bill into the American Senate concerning elimination of nuclear weapons, and also a letter to the president.
Hello, Alan. How's everything in Ann Arbor?
Hello. Well, it's a very provincial town. We struggle for the center of the city to be a commons, and somehow the concept is beyond the capacity of the powers that still are, which is, I fear, very regressive. We had an excellent Earth Day postponed blooming, with a Native American introduction, kind of grounding us where we were and bringing all the communities of town together into a kind of agora, which was most beautiful, with great music. These powers that be, though, still want to take this land and put a price on it and sell it, and so the struggle continues. And we do have a very good, persistent demonstration. Don't escalate, negotiate by the federal building.
Is it the Commons? Do you have a common square or something, and they're going to sell it out from under you, or what?
There was a piece of land that is right in the center of the city, and we proposed that as a public square, as a commons, relying on the sense of the user self-management of the commonly pooled resources that won the Nobel Prize in economics for demonstrating the commons was more effective in managing resources than either the government or the private corporation. So we managed to put that on the ballot, and we actually won. And so we have on the ground been trying to develop this sense of a community around a space for everyone. The city, however, refuses really to cooperate, and so the struggle goes on. The 15th of June is one of the historians of the Commons lives in Ann Arbor, Peter Linebaugh, who wrote the Magna Carta Manifesto and the Many-Headed Hydra and Stop Thief and many questions on the Commons. He points out that on June 15th could be noted as Wat Tyler Day, who was a champion of the Commons in the Peasants' Revolt of 1381, which echoed the Magna Carta on the 15th of June in 1215, and trying to see our energy of movement resonating with these struggles against capital and power to take what is for everyone in the Commonwealth.
I should have introduced you, Alan, because people here, probably most people don't know that you have the history of being one of the main members of the Students for Democratic Society, SDS, in the old days, back in the 80s. And you were one of the leaders of it. And I think you were also very involved with the People's Park event in Berkeley, weren't you?
Very, very much so. I heard that I moved to Berkeley in 1968 in the summer from New York and Washington, D.C. after leaving Ann Arbor in 1967. And I got to go to jail right at the beginning for Eldridge Cleaver and the Peace and Freedom Party. But then the next spring began People's Park, and I had become involved in that for...
Your lady is waving at us. Okay, everybody wave back.
This is Odile,
Yeah, Odile.
So she works for the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, and for a weapons-free zone, nuclear weapons of mass destruction-free zone in the Middle East.
This is one of the activist households of all times.
We just did Earth Day, Earth and World Water Day concert in Times Square, 5-hour live worldwide broadcast. I'm a TV producer, 50 years, formerly CBS, PBS, and I made like 6,000 shows in my life. In any case, we take over Times Square for Earth Day. We helped create World Water Day at the United Nations, my associate Phil Sowers. And now September 21st, this will be our 21st annual International Day of Peace event. We did it mostly in Central Park in New York. I've been doing it additionally in Times Square for about 8 years now. And we do a big live worldwide broadcast for 5 or so hours, and it's called Pause the World for Peace.org. We're a nonprofit 501c3, and if anyone has, and we have a show also called Good News Broadcast and Good News Planet, which is sharing. We just had the honor to interview our host here on this call. And that was a big joy for me. And for Good News Planet. So I welcome you to send me something. I put my email, I put other information about what we're doing, and I'll be happy to have you involved in any manner, shape, or form. We're
Thank
all
you.
in it together.
Okay, listen,
So,
I want to
thank you.
remind people what I do, Paul. You put things in the chat, and our viewers who are worldwide aren't able to see the chat, of course, but I will, after I post it on our website, to savetheworld.ca, in a day or so, I will post the chat available, make that available there too. So you can find that in the comments section of the page for this particular global town hall. Lyn Adamson, you have a question. Is it related, or are we going off on a
No,
different?
this is my my issue that I wanted to raise, and I put a couple things in the chat. And by the way, I'm able to click on the little dots next to a message and copy it and keep it myself. So I copied your links, Paul, so that I'll have them. But I'm a co-chair with Canadian Voice of Women for Peace, and we're having some internal discussion about the group's position on the war in Ukraine. And I have a different point of view from some of the others on the board. So we're actually having a discussion tonight again about it. So I wondered what folks here have been thinking, and I put a couple of links, as I said, in the chat. One was an article by Steve Staples in his weekly Peace Quest newsletter, and he linked to this article by Joe Cirancione, I believe, might be pronounced like that. And yeah, and I found that article interesting, to revealing in terms of the what I would consider a double standard that people are applying to this invasion of Ukraine by Russia. Everybody says they shouldn't have invaded, but we're not hearing people say they should therefore withdraw their troops. People are saying they should just negotiate. And what does that mean around the territories that they are taking over? And I realize there's a complicated history to this war and the many things that led up to it. But it's a terrible situation. And anyway, I'm troubled because I'm a mediator and have been a peace team trainer in my lifetime, and we've always tried to apply the same principles to an action. So invading, is, I understand, is against international law. We don't support it when the US does it. So why are we being quiet about it when Russia does it and not calling for a withdrawal from their invasion? So people might have something to say about it here. I understand Code Pink and a lot of other groups have, it's all the problem of the US. The US is, and NATO is behind it all. But I wonder if, like in his article, there's a statement that there were options for Russia, given what they wanted but weren't getting, apparently.
Say it again.
There were options for Russia other than invading Ukraine. When they were not getting what they wanted, they invaded rather than try to use other diplomatic means to resolve the security questions that they had, concerns that they had. So I'm interested in if any wise minds on this call can shed light on to this situation.
Thank you for raising that question, because it is number one. It's very, very important debate. In the next issue of Peace Magazine, I think Robin Collins will give an overview of that debate. And it's certainly the most crucial thing going. So I think that let's spend some time with this. I'll be very interested in, I can guess what some of you believe, but I won't try to guess. I want to ask each of you to say your own position on this.
About 2 weeks ago, we had a biennial national meeting of the Liberal Party of Canada, which is currently in power, the government. And besides a talk by the current Prime Minister and one by Jean Chrétien from the 1990s leader, they had a discussion. They featured a discussion on the stage in Ottawa of our current Deputy Prime Minister, a lady whose family is originally from Ukraine, actually. And
Mr. Freeland.
yeah, Chrystia Freeman, and an invited guest, Hillary Clinton. And the two of them had a discussion, and Hillary Clinton came out very strongly with what I think Lyn was just saying, that this is just an invasion against the whole principles of world order, and that was open and shut. Russia was at fault for doing that. The war just must continue until hopefully Zelensky's idea of the whole territory of Ukraine being salvaged as a starting argument. But I, with others, believe that how this war came about, that from 1990 to 2020, NATO continually extended eastward and populated its growing number of countries with some deterrent weapons, and to the point where Finland and Sweden trying to remain neutral at the north, and Belarus and Ukraine at the south were still not in NATO. But the government that came in Ukraine about 2015 under Zelensky was hinting of not just EU, which would be okay, but joining NATO. And of course, NATO has an agreement with all countries that if one was attacked, all would be considered attacked and would attack the attacker in return. So this is what Putin was faced with from 1990 to 2020. And of course, in 2012-13, there was the fighting in the two eastern provinces of Ukraine, which were primarily Russian-oriented population. And by the way, were probably the kind of the heavy industry part of Ukraine. And there was an agreement in 2014 when all this situation I just described. And there was in Minsk, capital of Belarus, the city where people met, France and Germany governments, I think, or maybe Britain, took part in the bargaining, and the Minsk agreement was an agreement which seemed to be balanced and acceptable, and was acceptable to the then Ukrainian government and the Russian. But that's when the election took place. Zelensky came in power and said, no, we want Ukraine completely free of Russian presence, and that's been their status since. And I think that still a replica of Minsk in some way, with two other countries, maybe even Brazil on one side and China on the other or something, coming to an agreement resembling Minsk, whereas some power, those eastern provinces of the Russian, should still persist. That could be an agreement that could end the war.
Thank you. We've been joined by, I think it's Andrei Kamenshikov. And let me ask Lyn very quickly if you will again sort of pose the question the way you want us to address it, Lyn, so that Andrei can speak to it, because Andrei Kamenshikov is a Russian American who is a peace organizer, full-time peace worker, and he is living in Kyiv, and he's speaking from Kyiv now. It's very important to hear the point of view of peace workers in Eastern Europe and in throughout that region. Andrei has just been on a trip. He's been trying to organize Russian diaspora people in Central Asia. So, Lyn, if you'll quickly restate the question you want us to address, and then I'd love for Andrei to bring us up to date on what he's been doing and what he thinks about the current state of affairs.
Yep, I put the links in the chat again because you wouldn't have seen them, Andre, from earlier. But there was a little article by Steve Staples in Peace Quest newsletter that I get weekly from him, and he linked to an article by Joe Cirincione about the divided left over Ukraine, over the response. And I had explained that I'm co-chair of Voice of Women for Peace, and we are somewhat divided as well within our organization on this question of what we should be calling for at this point. Everyone seems to agree that Russia should not have invaded. It's obviously a brutal war, but then they shouldn't have invaded, but we're not calling for them to withdraw. And we're just calling for negotiations. And I don't see, it's always good to talk. I'm not opposed to talking. It's just that keeping, it seems to be, it's against international law to invade. And so that we would not accept that when the U.S. does it. And I sure don't like the U.S. I don't like Hillary Clinton saying people shouldn't be invading. I mean, the U.S. invades all the time. So she's really not the person to be able to judge another country in a sense for that. But in terms of being a peace movement and what we're calling for, what should we be trying to do at this point to be useful? We're in a very scary point we talked about earlier in the call around nuclear weapons, and just in terms of stability and any momentum around actually resolving our problems, talking about them and resolving them, rather than having a brutal war that's just like the world wars in terms of its brutality for people living there. So that's what.
Yes. Yeah, I know about this division, and I've seen some discussions. As I understand, there's a conference coming up fairly soon in Vienna, and there's a lot of debate about that. I think even it was considered that President Lulu would be there, or was addressed or something like that. So I'm actually right now in Poland, in Warsaw, right next door to where Alexei Prokhorenko is. He should join, and I might try to speak on his computer once he joins, because maybe that will be because I have problems with my camera, and apparently with the microphone isn't working too well either now. But back to your question. This is a very difficult issue, because on one hand, we as peace builders want war and violence to stop immediately. On the other, I feel that there is no excuse for the actions that Putin's regime has done in relation to Ukraine. And any ceasefire today that would allow Russia to hold on to parts of Ukrainian territory would not be a good sign for the future. And also, to be quite frank, it's not something that neither Ukraine's government or Ukraine's society accept today. It just won't be accepted. So there can be all kinds of plans devised by China, Brazil, and so forth. It's simply not going to work because, as long as one side is not ready to accept it, it's not going to work. So I don't see too much need to spend lots of time discussing various schemes that, that simply won't be materialized.
Mhm.
In that sense. And my position is the following. I understand that in the coming months, this war, the violent phase of the war, unfortunately, will continue. What I think we need to do is we need to focus on realistic ways that we can help, first of all, help bring this war to a just end sooner rather than later. And second, do anything possible to decrease the human toll of the war. That's what I feel where there is space to take action and to do something. But I don't think any plans in that around an immediate ceasefire are realistic today.
Thank you. Now, you have been on a tour doing exactly what you said you think is a worthwhile thing, which I agree. It's precisely one of the few really helpful things that we have the capacity to do right now. And that is get in touch with Russians who oppose the war and see if we can have some influence on helping them to mobilize and to organize and to articulate the position that we think they need to take. Tell us about your tour and where things stand now in your judgment about the Russian diaspora. Especially, I think you've been in Central Asia, but where have you been? Around Georgia and Armenia and everywhere, or what?
I've been to Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Georgia, Germany, Poland, and Lithuania. I will probably visit Armenia at some point in the future, but I don't know yet exactly when. And I'm right now in Poland. I'll be going back to Kyiv tomorrow. And I traveled specifically to try to see how it is possible and whether it is possible to engage the thousands and thousands of Russians who left the country because of the war, because they don't want to be part of the war, because they're either opposed to the war as such, or they simply don't want to be mobilized, don't want their lives to be sacrificed, whatever. They left the country because of the war. And I believe that if we can effectively work with them, then they can become communicators, become people that can speak to others, to those who remain in Russia, and bring in information that people that I would say 70% of the population of Russia does not receive. About 70% of the population of Russia still receives information primarily from government-controlled media sources or government-influenced social networks and so forth. It is not that they don't have the means to get information, but it's this situation where they don't really have maybe the desire to listen to information that contradicts the official narrative. It's a difficult task, of course, and it's not easy to explain to people that the things that their country is doing in their name are so terrible and disastrous, both for their own country and for their neighbors. It's nobody wants to recognize that their country in their name is committing crimes, very serious crimes. And so some people, have the courage and they see that, but and that's a significant number, but the majority does not. There are lots of Russian language, independent Russian language media that operate through various internet channels. The problem is, again, that they reach those who are already critically minded. And the question is, sometimes people refer to this as a liberal bubble, maybe 20 or 30 million Russians that are more or less adequate, critically minded, understand what's happening, but don't feel that they have much capacity to influence. And then you have the other, 70% that's either some of them, a small part of them are active supporters of the government, but most of them don't like what's going on. They're not for the war, but they see this these events as some kind of natural disaster. They feel helpless and hopeless, and they choose to go with the tide, basically. And this is the population that is really, this is kind of passively supporting the government. And when people are called in to be mobilized, many of them don't really resist. They feel that, well, they don't like that, but they feel, okay, that's our duty, what can we do? Our country calls on them. And so to reach these people, I hope that we can develop models within the diaspora, since many hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people left the country over the last year and a half. I believe that if we get enough of these people who left able to effectively speak to their own circle of relatives, friends, members of different social networks and so forth, we can get a channel to speak to those Russians who today are not listening to alternative Russian language media sources.
Are you having any luck? Because we see that I'm so pleased that you've made this tour, and you must have seen thousands of these people. How successful are you in organizing them? How ready are they to participate in doing the kinds of things that you want, that is to continue actively reaching out toward their families and their friends in Russia and attempting to change their views?
I have mixed results. I was able to organize 3 group events where people came together in groups and discussed that. My task right now is to try to launch a process where people will start to gather regularly to discuss these communication issues and to improve. So right now, I am I'm trying to launch these processes, to do some pilots. So if I can get a group of 10 or 15 people in Kazakhstan, 10 or 15 people in Georgia, 10 or 15 people in Armenia or somewhere else to regularly meet, to regularly get more engaged in this communication process. That's what, then I could say, okay, here we have a working model, how we can work. Unfortunately, I'm still in, it takes more time, more effort than I would like it to take. So just organizing this process is a pretty difficult task. People obviously have many other priorities. And so people who agree to coordinate this work in different areas. One of these people ended up having all kinds of medical problems and is in a hospital right now. Another had to change her place where she lived and so forth. So it's been, it's been challenging, and it's very challenging in terms of resources, because basically, I have almost no resources at this point, to at least, pay a modest salary to people who would play this role. It is also challenging often to get people together. Unfortunately, Russians are often not very willing to actually meet together. And today, just a few hours ago, was a negative experience where I came here to Warsaw. Where we planned the event with the Russian diaspora, and about 10 people signed up to the event, and no one showed up.
Oh, dear.
This is another problem that you have. So, there have been some successes, in different countries. The situation is very different. The people that came to different countries are also very different. People that come to one place, people come to where they can go. Poland does not allow any Russian to come to Poland today. It's very hard for Russians to get a visa. So they only allow people who have a background of political activism, who they support because they see that these people, people that were arrested for, let's say, participating in anti-war demonstrations or things like that, they are able to get humanitarian visas. But the community here is fairly small, and it's not very organized.
Let me bring you up to date on something, because I know you were in Tashkent in Uzbekistan, and the other people here may not remember or have noticed that we did a talk show about the plight of the Russian men who left Russia in order to avoid being sent off to Ukraine to fight. And there are maybe close to 1 million of them in various places, and they have great difficulty getting visas or getting immigration papers to go to the countries where they would like to go. But I did a talk show with you. Doug Saunders was the co-host, and you were speaking, and Konstantin Samoylov in Tashkent, and Alexei Prokorenko there in Moscow, I mean in Warsaw. So presumably he will join us again later in the conversation. Anyway, I promised to follow up on that and do another show to see whether we could do anything to change the predicament, the legal reaction that countries are making by excluding some of these people when I think they shouldn't. So I've been in touch with Bob Ray, and Bob is, the Canadian ambassador to the United Nations, and he has agreed to be on the show to answer questions again. So you and Konstantin and Alexei, and then there's another man that you put me in touch with named Volodya in someplace in I don't know, Kazakhstan, I think. Yes. So we will have that conversation as soon as Bob Ray gets permission from Ottawa to participate. He has to get the consent of the ministry. But I assume he will get it. So we'll have that conversation in a week or two, if that's all right with you. And I did see by chance last night, Konstantin was on another video interview with some British fellow. And he was saying Konstantin started a breakfast club in Tashkent, Uzbekistan, for people similar to his own situation. But he's also invited Ukrainians and other people of other nationalities. But of course, he's especially wanting to bring together Ukrainians and Russians. And he says now that breakfast club has increased, and they have 500 members. Not all, of course, they all get together in any one day, but every day, every morning, it's a dozen or so people getting together. And he said that it was originally conceived of as a kind of a support group for people who were having emotional distress at having to leave their homes and be refugees. But now it's gone beyond that. And he indicated that, of course, they're organizing to do political actions. He was not going to tell us right then and there what they're doing. And I can understand why he wouldn't, because they have to be careful. But at any rate, I know that you were in touch with him, and it seems from what he sounded like that they are having more luck. He's having a lot of luck in getting these Russians in the Breakfast Club to become politically engaged. Do you have anything to say about that?
I would say that I was more encouraged during my meetings in Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan than in other places. And the interesting thing is that the people that ended up in these countries are usually less politically, engaged previously.
Mhm.
But now, because of the situation that they found themselves in, some of them are ready to play a certain role, and some are doing things that they mentioned, and I won't mention again for obvious reasons here. But in terms of communication, we had a dialogue. Unfortunately, it was an online event with the folks in Uzbekistan because it takes time to organize something like that.
Mhm.
And in the 4 days that I was in Tashkent, it usually takes, a couple of weeks to actually do a group event. So I did it online. But I hope that, yes, maybe Uzbekistan can be one of the countries where we would start this process, because where people would gather not just to discuss other issues, but also to discuss communication, how to more effectively communicate with people in Russia. And I would want to support that, in terms of also providing maybe some training modules to these things, and kind of get people into this process of being active communicators.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to call on Lida in a moment, but I want to say hello to Paul Werbos, who has joined us. Paul has been on a trip of his own for several months, actually. He went off to Japan, and so it's nice to see you back, Paul. And I'll call on you in a bit because I want to.
Of course, this is a very interesting subject.
Yes, we'll come back though, because I want to hear what you have to say about the new concerns about artificial intelligence. Paul Werbos is, you might say, the father of the new artificial intelligence, but he sure isn't he doesn't like to acknowledge paternity in this case, I think sometimes, because they're not, he's worried about what's coming down the pike. Anyway, we'll come back to you, Paul, but I want to call on Lida because, yes.
Yeah, I was wondering, of course, the anti-war Ukrainians and Russians, they would be the people to build the bridges between the two groups and just stop the fighting. And there are, now I'm saying what I read in the newspapers, that there are lots of Russians that are sort of, they are told to be traitors, that is, they do not agree with the war and so on. And they are, within the Russian army. That's what I read, but I'm just thinking, is it necessary for NATO to expand east? Or the times of Gorbachev, they were saying to include Russia also in NATO. I don't know if that's possible anymore after all of this fighting that has happened. When everybody wants to take the other's guts out, that's difficult, but is it necessary? I remember the day before the invasion, we heard in the news that they wanted to, Ukraine was bent to, they wanted to join NATO. And then this is when, lots of experts said that now it's going to be a war. So can we just go back, reverse that and say, okay, NATO not to expand. Is that going to keep both sides happy? Is that a way to bring peace? Because if Biden says that we have to eliminate Russia, and that's not a way to bring peace. That's the road to a nuclear war.
I think that there were many mistakes made by NATO countries in the 90s and the first 2 decades of this century. They didn't understand some of the effects that their actions had on Russia.
Yeah.
They made, of course, the terrible examples of the war in Iraq and the bombing of Yugoslavia, and the Pandora box was opened when major NATO countries, not all, but most, have recognized the self-proclaimed independence of Kosovo in, I think, February of 2008. All these very serious mistakes were made, and I wish they wouldn't. And probably, if they would not be made, we wouldn't face the situation we have today. However, we cannot reverse history, and we can say that, looking into history, that, the Munich Agreement of 1938 was a terrible mistake. Okay, it was a terrible mistake, and it was one of the factors that led Hitler to, World War II, but we can't reverse that. And the fact that there were mistakes made by Western powers does not mean that in some way excuses the criminal actions of the leadership today in the Kremlin. Today, I feel very uncomfortable when I hear proposals that are made by very well intended, and very good people that I respect, that are focused to bring peace by somehow satisfying the desires of the Kremlin. Because it's like, you can negotiate when someone is upset about something and he takes a dagger in his hands and starts threatening his neighbor. As long as he's threatening, it might make sense to try to negotiate with him and to explain with him and to find consent. But after he uses his dagger and starts stabbing someone,
Yeah,
he needs to be stopped and he needs to be punished. And if this war ends with some kind of something that would accommodate Putin's desires and allow him to show his defeat as a victory, that might have long-term negative consequences, both for Russia, for Ukraine, and for the world in general. And at the same time, again, let's be realistic. Today, Ukrainian society will not accept any kind of settlement that will keep Russian troops on Ukrainian soil. And it's just not going to happen. We need to recognize this. This is the reality today. So it's a very, I understand, the good intentions, but we need to also understand the harsh reality. And would would it make sense for NATO to make adjustments in their policy to, if sometime things change and Russia reemerges as a, democracy, should it be better heard and better integrated into these kind of institutions? Fine, that would be a great idea. But it's one thing before a crime is committed, and it's another thing after a crime is committed. It's a different kind of situation. And we're unfortunately today in this different situation where, this war, we can't end this war by trying to accommodate the power that started it.
Mhm. Thank you. I want to go back to Lyn because Lyn started this, and you may have thoughts and reactions.
I've been in dialogue with a friend of mine, Ukrainian-Canadian friend of mine, who has studied the situation quite thoroughly. She's a real researcher. I get all kinds of stuff from her. But one of the things that she sent to me was a poll, the pre-invasion poll. Most Ukrainians did not want to join NATO. And the post-invasion poll, most Ukrainians want to join NATO. They've just been attacked, despite the fact that they were not members of NATO at the time. And, so the opportunity to build on the Minsk Accords that were referred to earlier, which I'm aware of, and which I understand Zelensky, when he campaigned, was campaigning to make peace with Russia. And there was thought that there was some chance that those could be implemented, but then they were not. And I hear all kinds of different stories about why they were not. And there was essentially a civil war going on in the eastern part of Ukraine for 7 years with 14,000 deaths, something like that, in that time. So I just wanted to point out that the mood in Ukraine, and it's sort of what you're saying, Robert, you can't go back to the opportunities that were there before the invasion, because the situation is different now. But most peace groups, Andre, I don't know if you're aware of this, but Code Pink, all kinds of peace groups, and even the people that are speaking in the Vienna conference, I think are predominantly, this is all the fault of the West, and they're not saying, anything about Russia needs to withdraw and not win territory from having been the aggressor at this time. So I remain very concerned about it. And probably the most hopeful thing I heard today was the idea of some dialogue between peace-oriented people in Russia and in Ukraine and the rest of the world. And I don't know if any of those people are going to be able to get to this Vienna conference or Zoom in, because it's going to be online as well. Because I think we need some more creative ideas that are people powered, because the state powers involved here are locked into this violent conflict. So how we get that to change, I don't know. If the people in Russia are not really free to pursue their opposition to a war or government policy, because they will be punished severely for doing that.
I wanted to react. Unfortunately, what was just said is a key mistake that lies behind lots of the misunderstandings of what is happening today in Ukraine. What I just heard is that Lyn said that, we know that there was a civil war going on in Ukraine for 8 years. That is simply not true. What happened in Ukraine in 2014 was not a civil war. It was a military conflict that was imposed on Ukraine by Russia. Yes, it used the tensions that exist in civil society in Ukraine, and it played on that. But it didn't develop as most internal conflicts develop in other parts of the world where we have seen civil wars secessionist movements and things like that happened. It happened, the logic was very different. The event that triggered the beginning of that conflict was an invasion of a group of 100 or a couple hundred people under the armed and supported by Russia invasion that came, people came across the Russian-Ukrainian border. They were headed by a Russian citizen, FSB officer, and they took over a few towns, a few cities, mid-sized cities in the eastern part of Ukraine. That happened. After that happened, 2 days later, the Ukrainian government responded by starting at what they called the anti-terrorist operation. But this was not a case that you can put in line with many other secessionist movements that you've seen in different parts of the world, because it was artificially aggravated. Internal tensions that did exist were artificially aggravated by a foreign player, and the tensions were fueled and supported, and basically there simply would be no war without that initial invasion. And that even was recognized by the person that led that invasion. He openly stated that he was the person that started that lit the light of this war. So it cannot be described as a typical civil war that you have. And that's something that people need to understand. And when Ukrainians hear that this is a civil war, that creates usually a very strong reaction. I understand why people make that mistake. And I do say that there definitely were elements of a civil war in what was happening, because there were people, Ukrainian citizens, fighting on both sides. But the dynamic of the conflict was very different than many, many other cases that we know. And so the narrative that supposedly the people of Eastern Ukraine revolted against the coup or the ousting of President Yanukovych in Kiev against the Maidan, that is a false narrative. It's a Russian propaganda narrative that unfortunately has been picked up by many people in the peace movement worldwide and has distorted their views of what is actually taking place. Sorry, I just wanted to make this clear. Thank you.
And if you have a link to information to substantiate what you're saying, because as you said, that is not what a lot of the peace activists are saying. And I'm dealing with some very vocal people who blame it all on like Ukrainian Nazis in the eastern regions there. And they can even provide videos. So I've seen their videos. So, I can't have a dialogue on this without a link. I can't just say, well, Andre said, blah, blah, blah. I'm going to have something more. But thank you for giving your perspective. I appreciate that.
For a start, I can look for links. For a start, I was personally there when it happened. So I'm a witness. I was in Donetsk on April, I think, 11th or 12th, and speaking to people on the pro-Russian side and on the pro-Ukrainian side. And while there were tensions in Donetsk, both sides agreed that there should be no violence. There were attempts of Ukrainian government to negotiate with the pro-Russian people. In the evening, I think it was 11th or 12th of April, 12th of April, a woman called me up from the pro-Russian group that said, we just met with acting Prime Minister, what was his name, Yatsenyuk. He came to Donetsk. We had a very productive discussion with him, and he seems to be able to respond to most of our concerns. The next morning, early in the morning, I had a flight to Kiev, came to Kiev, while I was flying, I was, putting together a list of ideas on, what can be done, what kind of dialogue initiatives and all can be done to help ease the tensions. By the time I got to Kiev and settled in my hotel and then came to my friends, it was midday. And when I entered the office of some of my colleagues in Kiev, they were staring at the computer screen because that morning, this invasion in the city of Slavyansk and then in the city of Kramatorsk in the Donetsk region happened. And that morning, this group of well-armed people from Russia, some of them were Ukrainian citizens, some were Russian citizens. They were well-armed. They came in and took over power in 2 Ukrainian cities. And they started this war. And the first victims were victims that people that they killed or their supporters killed in the process. And that created a wave of a strong reaction on the Ukrainian side. And then in response to that, Ukraine announced this anti-terrorist operation and started using force trying to put down this event. So
Well, yeah, no, but that's extremely helpful what you just said to me. But can you give me the year then that was?
that
20
was April of 2014.
2014. Okay, thank you. I mean, that you were there and were involved in efforts to deal with the issues at the time without increased violence was is certainly something that I can mention when I'm on that meeting.
Another thing that's very important to say is that to understand is that the Russian narrative speaks about the revolt of people in the Donbass in eastern Ukraine against the change of government in Kiev. Now, in Ukraine, it is a democratic state. Every region has an elected, regional parliament, including the Donetsk and the Lugansk region. And it would be natural if people in a region are dissatisfied with their central government, that their regional parliament speaks on their behalf. For example, there was a case a number of years ago when in Catalonia in Spain, the Catalonian parliament or whatever their regional legislative body, I think, voted for negotiating with Madrid about, greater autonomy or independence, something like that. There was a whole movement there, and, that's still a big issue for Spain. In the case of Ukraine, in the case of Donetsk and Luhansk, that's not what happened. What happened was a crowd of people, a demonstration, you can say. Some of these people in the demonstration were armed, gathers in front of the regional parliaments, then enters them and basically occupies the building. And then people from this crowd announce themselves, declare themselves as the representatives of the people of this region, not the elected members of the regional parliament. There might be a few local representatives among them, but the fact is that it was not, neither in Lugansk nor in Donetsk did the official regional legislative body vote for these changes. It was a crowd that broke in, entered the hall, where they usually meet, and declared themselves to be the representatives of the people. That's not how democracy works. And the narrative that people, supposedly the people of the Donetsk and Lugansk region revolted against Kiev is wrong, because neither of the regional legislative bodies and neither of these regions did that. It was people from the street that did that. that had no base to claim that they represent the majority of the population. That's something that people often don't understand. That's different. In Crimea, it was a little different. In Crimea, after Russian troops took control of key locations, they did bring members of the regional parliament. I don't know how many, was it legal to vote for to hold a referendum on independence and on joining Russia and all that stuff. Again, not all, I don't know, how many members they were, but they worked in Crimea, they worked with the members of the regional parliament. But neither in Donetsk or Lugansk did they do that because they didn't have that support. So they just, the pro-Russian groups entered the buildings and announced that they are the representatives of the people. That's all. That's how it
Thank you.
started.
That we have a situation that we have inherited of a global polity around state powers, which is at least 19th century, but older image of sovereignty, exclusive sovereignty with a flag, a king, and an army that contended with one another over borders. And that may at some point been appropriate, but in the globalized world of easy travel and internet, and actually the amount of the dispersion of populations and diasporas, many people are of multiple sovereignties. And we need a sense in our idealism of what is the way to peace to have a different view of what is the state. The state is the loyalty in the heart that you share with other people who have certain commonalities. And that is a situation where states overlay and are side by side and interpenetrate. And as it would be if Palestine were allowed, the Palestinians were allowed to come back and see, how do they live side by side with Israelis? These two states overlay one another. And in some way, that's a similar situation in Ukraine and Russia. And rather than make a border, make a recognition that states coexist in people's hearts. And then administratively, how do you make a fair sense of distribution of resources and so on? But that's an entirely different question. This is a question of sovereignty, and I think we need a different sense for the peace movement to say we need a sense of sovereignty that is not based on exclusive sovereignty, but recognizes the multiplicity of sovereignties that exist in the world now and will increasingly be so to come. Anyhow, it's a little different take on it than looking at, struggle by struggle, day by day, and what happened in the Ukraine. But I think we need to put forward a vision of how to restructure the global security system to end the war system, to see a multipolarity that recognizes everyone's sovereignty and a way of collective cooperation. As the Pentagon says, their vision is full spectrum dominance, and we need a system of full spectrum cooperation. A system change is the key, I think, to integrate all our good ideas together.
And I want to call on Paul Werbos because I haven't talked to my friend for several months. You've been off on a trip to Japan, and I don't know where else. So welcome back to this continent, and you came back just in time to run into a buzzsaw.
I am used to weird coincidences in this world. It's just unbelievable. This morning I was at a Quaker meeting, so I'm fully into the peace issues. And I really like what Alan just said about how we need to move forward towards a global system where we don't have to kill each other all the time. We have to figure out a way to manage things so that we're not always killing each other. I feel so much connection to these places where my wife and I got to know each other. The Crimea, the Eastern Sea, the Romanov family, the US-Russian interactions. These are very, very personal. And it is connecting to a massive change, which is what I was really invited here for, on the internet. We are entering a radically new era. A radically new era where, at a minimum, the computer connections are fundamentally changing how the system works. Just in the last few years, there was a massive change. Last I heard, the data from the Atlantic Council was saying there are now more robots than there are humans on planet Earth. And if you make policy decisions based on the assumption that, oh, there are more humans than there are robots, you are not living in the real world. So is there anything we can do to reduce the risk? One of the efforts I'm really excited by, I informed Meta about early on, multiple stages. There's a thing called the Millennium Project of futurists. Started out being part of the United Nations University, kind of grew. And they're doing some work with the Secretary General of the United Nations. They were saying to the Secretary General of the United Nations, we want to have an Office of Existential Threats under the Security Council. So several years ago, we started saying we need an office under the Security Council to deeply understand and study those very specific new threats which threaten the entire human species. The existence of the human species should be the basis of that office. Initially, we got support from major people in the US and the Secretary General wanting to focus on the climate risk, which is real and legitimate. And Meta has been very helpful to us in getting a dialogue going on the climate risk, which is life or death. But then came along a guy named Xi Jinping, and then came a lot of other people saying, hey, wait, climate extinction is a big threat, but even bigger are the way that changes in the internet system, artificial intelligence, artificial general intelligence, connections to human brains, and the Internet of Things, all of these robots reporting back to mama. That system as a whole presents a threat to humanity. And so we're talking about trying to build international networks to understand what is the threat and what can we do about it. I was very excited this past week to hear that people in, I think, Sweden and Africa agreed with a proposal from my friend Jerry in the Millennium Project and the United Nations to say, okay, let us do work on something we call a global digital compact.
Mhm.
And if you look up this search term, global digital compact, it will describe a whole series of discussions, which the Swedes seem to be leading right now, aimed at trying to create a new agency or agreement to address the existential threats related to internet. And there are many. As I say, what's happening in the Ukraine is a small example. The minute you have autonomous weapons under computer control, using insecure communications media with the human beings not knowing what they have, that creates instabilities which to me are scarier than the situation in the Ukraine. I care about the people in the Ukraine. My wife and I really almost met each other there. But the problem is the whole world is at stake right now because of instabilities coming through the internet. And we really need to work on the internet instabilities. We need a new, more reliable, sustainable global system. And I'm glad that there's some dialogue started on how to build a better system that can work.
Mhm.
But there's a lot of work needed.
You know, I want to ask you a little bit about that because, and I haven't really announced it here, but we're going to be having the first annual general meeting of Project Save the World. And if any of you folks want to be members of Project Save the World, just send me a note saying you want to be, and with your email, and I'll send you information about how you can come to the annual general meeting. And then that you will elect the board of directors. The board of directors has been chosen to represent each person should represent one of the 6 global threats that we have, as Project Save the World, decided to focus on. And Paul Werbos was chosen because he knows a thing or two about artificial intelligence. And we have cyber risk as one of the 6 global threats. So it's now coming into its own as a real threat. So we'll be having a board meeting. You guys will elect us to be your board of directors, and then we'll have a board meeting. And what I'm hoping is that each member of the board will bring something to the organization such that they will benefit, and their organizations and the networks of people that they represent will benefit from participating, so that in any one board meeting, the best one will be the ones where everybody feels that they go away with more benefits from interacting with each other and finding how to share resources and information than they are asked to actually contribute. You should be able to get more than you bring as a donation to the organization. And so, Paul, I'm hoping that you will find ways in which Project Save the World can support the work that you're now being thrust upon you now to help us save ourselves from the impending dangers of artificial intelligence. Is that something you can give?
I'll do the best I can.
Yeah.
And we need to cooperate, we need to network, and this world needs a lot of help.
Okay. I want to greet Alexei Prokorenko, and we can
Oh,
see
yeah.
Kamenshikov.
I have to check out. Thanks a lot. Very good. I'll look forward to your general meeting.
Bye, Alan. Yes, now Alexei and you, Andre, are side by side now. We get a good look at Andre, but bring us
From Warsaw.
from Warsaw. Yeah, okay.
His computer has a normal camera, so now you can see me.
Still in Warsaw, and well, I'm no less optimistic than I was. Probably it's the time is going by and no changes are happening, but I feel that the change is coming soon, and I have that impression coming from the news. I can, well, coming from my talks, indirectly coming from my talks with my friends, my family, I can sense that something is changing in the air. I feel that something in the public opinion should be changing right now. So I'm
In
still
Russia, we should say.
Yes.
How so? What and also, Andre, do you agree with him?
I hope he's right. Due to my travels, I didn't have as much communications with people in Russia itself. I mainly communicated with people in the diaspora for the last 3 months. And so I'm a little out of date with what's actually happening internally. And I'll need to work on that as soon as I'm back in Kiev to update myself. So I really hope Alexei is right. I'd like to hope that things are the way he sees it. Things are definitely changing, in the war, but how does that reflect internally in Russia? I don't know.
Because just there's one thing we had. We normally have a VE Day celebration on May 9th. And normally you would see lots of cars next to cemeteries, many people with flowers, honoring their relatives, their fallen relatives, their older, their fathers, grandfathers who used to fight in that war, in World War II. But this year it's different. There were no people, no cars, although the weather was fine, no people coming to the cemetery. It's like the whole country is pretty much waiting for something.
There are things that are happening in society that might be difficult to judge because they're not very visible, but people's attitude has changed a lot, I think, over the last year and a half.
Mhm.
And
What is the new feeling then?
well, very many people are depressed. People, people are not sure about the future. They don't see what to look up to.
We're asking, how are people really feeling now in Russia? What is the real feeling?
Well, people are kind of stupefied, petrified, kind of waiting for something to happen. They're not. They're being very passive. Not like even the previous year when the war had already started. People were rather did rather embrace propaganda, did unite around the flag, so to speak. Now people are. It's a mixture of something of some resignation, maybe some passive attitude, some fear, such a cocktail of so maybe some even some willingness to subdue themselves to whatever circumstances may offer.
So, a funny thought comes to me. So I have some connections with this world of Russia. The first rule of those connections is don't shoot your mouth off too much. So I should need to be careful, right? People can be very upset at very small things. But one thing, I know some things about the psychology of Russia and Germany from deep psychology and personality things.
Sure.
And there's good mathematics in both countries. Mathematics and computers are a big part of Germany and Russia, even more than the United States. And there is also a psychological trait called tolerance of cognitive dissonance. People don't like being in a contradictory situation. It has to make sense. And if it doesn't make sense, it's very, very depressing. So to some extent, the challenge is, do we have a vision of peace and cooperation which fits the very best modern science and technology, which makes sense? And oh, golly, I can hear the voice of the Romanovs in the background saying, be very careful what you talk about, because this is all very delicate. This is all very sensitive. It's incredibly delicate. It's incredibly sensitive. But let me just say, I do hope that our new computer work, if we can move the United Nations towards a better way of addressing where we are going with advanced computers and technology and the interface with human rights and human feelings, then there is hope. And a lot of it does come down to how do we go about this issue of computer designs. But then we have people like Elon Musk, who are a mixed blessing. Somebody should talk about Elon Musk. Why do I think he's even relevant?
I want to ask about what you think is coming up. Last night, I listened to somebody interviewing Konstantin, whom you guys both have met, and he was asked, suppose, surely Putin's not going to be there forever. So what follows after Putin? And he basically said he can't foresee anything good, that there's going to be huge conflict, and whoever takes over is not going to be anything that we would celebrate. Now, I wonder, you, Alexei, say you're optimistic. why would you be optimistic about what's going on or anywhere near the Kremlin? I mean, you might be optimistic about public opinion changing, although I don't see any basis for it myself, but I'm not close enough to really know. But how could you be optimistic about the fact that these, you know, if anything, there are people speaking up now and then. I mean, Prigozhin is certainly shooting his mouth off, and as I understand it, the guy who was the head of, you know, the mayor or something of this town that these Russian guys invaded from Ukraine. Somebody said, how you know, what's going on here, and why isn't the army protecting us? And he said, I agree with you. You know, so if he's saying something's wrong that needs to be fixed, that, you know, the thing is crumbling. That means that there are other people who are, you know, not unified.
But you know, the whole world needs to be fixed. The whole world needs to be fixed, and certainly Russia is part of it. And forgive me, I'm going to become irrational. But you've touched on friendly family names. So we had Prokhorov, which to me is a family name almost. Romanov, Prigozhin. Russia has to be a major player, but Russia has to feel it's not somebody's puppet. And it has to make sense to people. It can't be like somebody in Brooklyn has a peace plan and we listen to this person in Brooklyn. I don't think Russia works that way. There has to be a coherent and logical vision that doesn't make people feel anxiety at coherence and fuzziness. It has to make sense to people. I'm hoping this new UN activity could provide a vehicle for it. We had this major international United Nations meeting on the Global Digital Compact. And the vision of the Global Digital Compact, this is supposed to be a new social contract for humanity that includes humans and computers and how they connect. It includes all of the issues like fake news, like weapons control, like money control. And if you think that money and weapons and fake news might be relevant, then it's rather relevant what agreement can we come up with to put these things on a more rational basis. So the Global Digital Compact is a very important effort to create sense and order before everything disintegrates.
Okay, listen, let me tell you who I want you to talk to. And that is this guy, I can't think of his name at the moment because I'm old, but the guy who just quit Google, and that there was a time when you guys were sort of rivals back in the 70s.
Like Hinton, maybe?
Hinton, yes, Jeffrey Hinton. I want to get you and him together to talk about what has to be done to fix
actually, that's not a bad idea. Jeff Hinton, who is in Toronto. Jeff Hinton is the kind of person who really could have some impacts. He and I have never had close interactions. There are a lot of reasons why we might have problems. You want to talk about diplomacy? You got a Russian and an American. You got a diplomacy problem. Okay. You got Jeff Hinton and me. We got a diplomacy problem. He comes from a different part of the cyber business. But in fact, yes, getting Hinton and I together, communicating on our common goals, I think that might be a good idea. And Hinton represents Canada also, and he has a lot of potential impact.
Well, he certainly made the news when he decided that he would quit Google so as to be able to speak freely about his criticism of I think he wants them to actually stop it right now. The whole AI thing, it needs to be regulated, and he's not the only one. The other guy, this Sam Altman or whatever his name.
Yeah, I know Sam. The truth is, Hinton wants to stop it, but the reason he has troubles is he doesn't know what it is. And if you could get him to lessen the ego prejudice a little, Hinton knows that I know what it is. The question is, does his human pride keep him from recognizing that, yeah, I can tell him what it is, because he doesn't know what it is and I do.
Oh boy, boy, now we'll have a real show. We'll have
And this is damn serious stuff. I mean, the new artificial intelligence is a technology. If you know what it is, you might be able to survive it.
Now look
If
here.
you don't, you're
You're
gonna
not
kill.
going to be able to make that stick, Paul. You
Yes,
cannot
I
say
can.
that Jeffrey Hinton doesn't know what AI is. He is the head honcho in
I know all about that. I funded the grant, which got him the money to be the head honcho. When I was at the National Science Foundation, I funded the grant to Lyn and to Ung, which resulted in Sergey Brin doing this project in Google. And if you go to my website, I have the video documentation of all of that. And Lyn liked Hinton for human reasons. He had a personal human debt to Hinton. He liked Hinton. He wanted to help him. He promoted him, and he promoted Hinton, even though Hinton didn't even know the damn technology. And I don't want to fight Hinton, but I just don't want the world to die.
He's
The problem
a
is, I'm perfectly happy with Hinton having money and power and all this, if he is willing to do the work. And if he's willing to do the work of helping save the world, in that case, we should work together, because he has power and I know things he doesn't know.
If I invite him in, will you be nice to him? You can't
Right?
tell him he doesn't know anything.
I try to be nice.
That's not diplomatic.
My biggest failings come from trying to be nice when I needed to be a little tougher.
You can't. do
Seriously,
it. I want you to talk to each other, but not that you don't.
not to kill each other. So the Romanovs have been teaching me not to kill people.
Okay.
At least not them.
Anyway, you got Romanovs on your mind today. Anyway, we're all through. It's now 4
Every day, in truth.
Every day.
Every day.
Because you're married to a Russian, and that's it, huh? Okay.
Of that family.
All right. Of the Romanov family? All right. Well, that's another story. I want to hear that story sometime. Okay. There are a lot of stories that you have to tell that I have not yet plumbed, and I hope to one of these times. Anyway, it's 4:01 p.m. Time to sign off. We've had our moment to share ideas, and I thank you all. It's been enjoyable, and I've learned a little bit, and maybe I hope everybody else has too. So it's been fun. Thank you very much, and come back next month. And the last Sunday of every month we do this, so expect to see you then. All right, take care. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Project Save the World produces these forums. This is episode 558. You can watch them or listen to them as audio podcasts on our website, tosavetheworld.ca. People share information there about 6 global issues, and I hope you will too. To find a particular talk show, enter its title or episode number in the search bar, or the name of one of the guest speakers. Project Save the World also produces a quarterly online publication, Peace Magazine. You can subscribe for $20 Canadian per year. Just go to pressreader.com on your browser, and in the search bar, enter the word peace. You'll see buttons to click to subscribe.